Alrighty, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So again, welcome. As I start every webinar, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're joining from. We're so excited to have you guys attend today's webinar. Hopefully you can hear us, see us. We're trying something new live from InfoTrust Studios in Chicago, as well as the screen for the content that we're going to be going through today. So again, really excited to have everyone join for today's webinar on the key differences between Google Analytics 360 and Adobe Analytics. One of the topics that are near and dear to our hearts and questions that we get a lot from our partners and clients. So really excited to have everyone join today. So a couple of housekeeping items before we jump right in. Again, hopefully you can hear us, see the screen share as well. And if you can, please type yes in the chat or questions panel within GoToWebinar so our team can confirm everything is working as expected. We'll have a couple polls throughout this webinar as well to hopefully keep everyone engaged. So keep an eye on the panel and the webinar flow because we'll be taking some pauses for some engagement. Speaking of the questions panel, we left time at the end, hopefully, for some Q&A, but also throughout the webinar. So if you have something you want to ask, a comment you want to share, anything like that, feel free to post in the chat or questions panel that you have access to. Between the two of us, we'll be monitoring that throughout, as well as our team that's logged in. We'll try our best to answer them as we go. We might save some for the end or suggest that we have a follow-up separately, depending on the type of question. So please don't hold back. We love having this to be as engaging and conversational as we can. And of course, we are recording this session. We will provide the recording, the slides, any other content that you guys are looking for, feel free to reach out, but we for sure will provide all the resources afterwards. And then also our emails are on the next slide and at the very end if you do want to follow up directly with us. Of course, you can check out our website, InfoTrust.com, for more content and upcoming events, which we'll talk about at the very end, as well as our Contact Us form if needed. Amazing. It looks like most people can hear, see us and the screen, so I think we're ready to get cooking. Okay, so who are we? My name is Amin Shaki. I'm the head of growth at InfoTrust, based here in Chicago, and my background, I've been with InfoTrust for I think almost 8 years now, and I've worked in our Cincinnati headquarters and our Dubai global office. I was actually there for a couple of years, leading that team in charge. Now back in Chicago, and I've worked across various different verticals from retail e-commerce, CPG multi-brand, news and media, and others, deploying enterprise analytics measurement platforms across a multitude of technologies, particularly on the Google side. So with Google Analytics 360, Tag Manager, and others that we'll talk about today. Pass it over to my colleague.
All right, thanks, Amin. Hey, everyone. My name is Dan Vividelli, and I'm a lead analytics consultant here at InfoTrust. Been with the team for about a year, but been in the industry for roughly 10 years. I've been on the client side, I've been on the consulting side. I've worked with Google Analytics and Adobe Analytics, so a fair mix of experience here that I'm excited to share with you guys.
Cool. So hopefully our prerequisites pass, I guess, for the knowledge that is needed to share about Google Analytics 360, Adobe Analytics, and differences here. So Dan and I are going to be going back and forth throughout the content and the slides here, depending on what we're sharing. A little bit about InfoTrust. We do these types of webinars all the time, trainings, workshops. We really enjoy being in the education space around analytics and measurement, and we do it across multiple offices globally. Right now we're in Chicago. I hear some construction happening, so hopefully that's not distracting to you, because it will be for us probably. I'm just kidding. Let's see. Okay. A little bit more about InfoTrust as a company. I'm going to just quickly touch on this slide. For the services we provide, it's really anything under measurement umbrella, if you will, from setup, compliance, tracking, all the way to analysis, insights, actionability. We are certified across a number of Google products in the Google Marketing Platform, but we work extensively with other tools and technologies, really depending on our clients' toolkit and their ecosystem. So we have lots of clients that use Adobe Analytics, enterprise clients, really deeply. So we're going to show some examples of how that works and why there's some strengths there, as well as on the Google side. Among that, we build our own technologies like Tag Inspector for data compliance, governance, validation. So really heavy in the measurement space. We don't actually do any media for clients, so we're going to talk a little bit about media platforms and integrations, but we don't run campaigns, do advertising. We're really focused just on measurement specifically. But we help to influence media optimization, I would say.
Yeah.
Is that good for our background?
Yeah, and didn't Tag Inspector win an award recently?
Oh my gosh, thank you for sharing that. Yes, so the Digital Analytics Association, DAA, had a award ceremony as part of their One conference a couple weeks ago, and Tag Inspector won Best New Technology for their cookie detection. So shameless plug, thanks for the reminder. We're really involved in the analytics community, and we get kind of geek out about that. So what are we going to talk about today? Let's get to the agenda and why everyone joined. Adobe Analytics, Google Analytics, the key differences. This is the flow for today. First, we're going to spend some time on the why around having an enterprise analytics platform and specifically considering these two as options. Then we're going to go into the really meat of the presentation, which is the product deep dives, comparisons, and we'll bring our collective knowledge and share with you guys considerations there. Some platform implementation and usage considerations will also bundle into that. And then at the end, we're going to talk about what our clients think and next steps, how to actually move forward from there. Like I mentioned, we're going to monitor the chat panel and questions throughout. So if you see us look down and click and pause, we're just checking out if there's anything we need to address. All right, so to get started around the why, for picking Adobe Analytics or Google Analytics 360, for us, you have to take a step back and kind of look at your business overall. When selecting any enterprise software, let alone an enterprise analytics platform, there's key questions that need to be asked to better understand which tool might be the best fit for you. We put together a couple examples here that we found useful when we work with clients that are exploring a switch, a migration from one to the other, or an upgrade from a free product that they might have or no product to an enterprise platform. So some of the things that we want to make sure we ask is, how is the data actually going to be used within the organization? Is the goal to have an interface and kind of self-serving model, or is it more of a data collection tool to output into a database so then you power your dashboards and other systems? How does the process work with your organization, and what are you looking to actually accomplish with this enterprise platform? How is your team built? So oftentimes happens a lot with many different organizations. So if you're in this boat, if you felt this pain, don't worry, you're not alone. But an enterprise tool is purchased and then not used, and questions are raised. People leave the organization and it lays dormant. And why are some tools that are super expensive still in place if no one's actually using them? So the question here, the thing that we always try to determine, what is your team structure? How are they going to use the tools? How are they designed to actually run marketing or run on-site analytics and digital marketing improvement? Along with that, what other tools, platforms do you also have in place? What type of ecosystem exists within your organization? Are you more of a Google shop, more of an Adobe shop? Are you agnostic and use all sorts of tools, whatever is best? Now, how does that actually work for your business? These are important questions to ask and know when looking at the analytics tool that will support all these other efforts, all these other technologies. And last but not least, do you have a roadmap for how your analytics department or analysts within your department, what are they going to be doing in the future, and how are they actually going to be handling analytics for your business moving forward? Because that does have an impact to where the product roadmaps are also heading as well, which I think we'll touch on a bit. So, important questions we always try to go through, even if it's already selected one platform. We like to ask these questions so that we implement the platform correctly in itself as well. As far as our process, beyond just asking those questions, we actually have a pretty structured process for looking at digital analytics transformation. As part of transformation might be upgrading to an enterprise platform, but we first start with that purpose. What does measurement mean for your business? What are you trying to accomplish? What areas are more of the focus? Is it driving better marketing off-site to bring people to your site, to your platforms? Or is it on-site product analytics or in-platform analytics, if you're a technology company? What is the purpose with measurement around your business, and the key focuses there are the priorities. Then we go through a process of reviewing people, platforms, and your internal processes to review data, leverage it, act on it. All of that comes together for us to provide a strategic recommendation that ultimately will come to pace and payoff. How fast can we get to insights that are appropriate for our business? And what is the payoff? What is the ROI? Is it actually going to drive our business forward? So again, don't want to spend too much time, but just giving you some ideas on our methodology when looking at which enterprise platform to actually select or consider for your business.
So one question that may flow nicely into the next slide. We just got one online. So what if I'm interested in migrating from Adobe to GA360 or vice versa? How does InfoTrust help with this process?
Wow, jumping straight to the money question. So typically, I think it comes back to the previous slide and this here, where though we're heavily certified on the Google side, and we love our Google partners, we also work with clients that are heavily invested in Adobe stack and Adobe technology. So it comes back to asking these questions and understanding, what is your business setup like? What are the people, process, platform now and in future that you want to get to? Once we understand kind of those answers, then we can determine, okay, what you have today, whether it's GA or Adobe, can remain but needs to be changed this way. Or because of your business and what you want to focus on, maybe a migration would be better. We actually have slides a little bit later that show side-by-side characteristics and what to look at when determining which one might be a better fit for you, which I think, to Dan's point, is a good segue to kind of reemphasize, picking either technology, it can be a tremendous investment for your business and with goals and outcomes to grow the business ultimately, but it does not fix everything within your organization. Going from Adobe to GA will not suddenly solve all of your analytics needs and won't give you all of the insights that you might be seeking that you do not currently have with your existing system. It can help if you have the right people, processes, and platforms that match more of what products are designed to do. Again, we'll talk more about that, but really want to stress, this technology or this technology, there's a lot more at play here. Got to think about, the supporting cast and toolkit. But also, it takes time and patience if you are considering a switch or upgrading between any of them. So we found with working with clients, there are sometimes quick fixes to repair a tool, but to migrate or pick another one, again, it doesn't solve all your problems unless you have a really good deployment and kind of setup around it. The cost of the platforms, we're not going to get into this because for the most part they're variable. I think Google has a little bit more standardized pricing versus Adobe Analytics, and we'll talk a little bit on it, but not in super specifics. But honestly, the price of the platform is negligible. If you're an enterprise, the analytics software should be supporting your growth. Your growth will be much more significant than the cost of the platform itself. What's really important is the ecosystem around it, which I feel like we're really hammering home here, but the platform alone is not the only cost. There's a lot more cost that goes around it, and really we like to think about which one's most valuable for your business. Because if you're going to bring in a platform, what is the value that comes with it, and how does it plug into everything else? In short, I guess to segue into the comparison specifically between GA360 and Adobe Analytics, from what we see, the type of businesses that use these different tools and also how we support them, GA360 is more designed for marketing and speed to insights and works well with Google stuff, like other Google products. Adobe Analytics is great for actual analytics, deep dive, insights, a lot more customizable. In fact, it has to be customized to actually be deployed well. And it works well with Adobe stuff, as expected. So customization and detail versus marketing, speed to insight, and which toolkit does it work better with. So those are kind of things to consider when looking at the right fit. Yeah, missed anything, Dan?
No, I think you got it.
Oh, okay, cool. Let's start with a poll. That was a lot of words all at once. So we're going to do a quick poll for about a minute or two. I'm going to launch it here in the GoToWebinar. The question is, which technology are you using today? For those that are joining, we suspect you're using one or the other, or maybe neither, or maybe both. So which one is it? We're going to take a quick poll just to kind of gauge the audience, and then we'll go into the product deep dives. So poll should be launched. You should be able to interact with your screen. I have a timer on here and percentage of people that have voted. So we're going to give it maybe about 30 seconds. We'll be quiet so people can think about this question. I don't think any other questions or chats or anything has come up, so Should be well connected, I think, at the moment.
Oh, we're getting a fun mix here.
Yeah. So we see over 50% have voted. Maybe we'll give it about 30% or 30 seconds more. All right, let's give it maybe 10, 15 seconds more. We're nearly at 70 to 75% voted. Some people may have stepped away for a late lunch or coffee. So much good information, you gotta make sure you're caffeinated for it. We should have had coffees here, I guess. Well,
Yeah.
For me. Okay. I think we can close the poll. We got a majority of folks that have actually replied. So I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So hopefully everyone can see. For those that are joining today, it looks like the majority is already using Google Analytics 360. Some are actually using Adobe Analytics and GA free or 360, kind of both platforms. And we often see that a lot. We'll talk about that a little later. Some are using the free product and some are only using Adobe Analytics, with a small percentage that are using none. I'd love to know more about those that aren't using either, so feel free to post in the questions or chat panel. What are you using if neither Google Analytics 360 or Adobe Analytics or even the free version of GA? I'd be very curious because for most enterprises today, they're using one or both of these technologies from what we see. And it's actually interesting, a lot of clients, and Danny, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of clients, at least that we've worked with, have Adobe Analytics and in some degree, some kind of Google Analytics, at least the free version. It is the most popular web analytics platform in the world, the free version, I mean, of GA, because it's kind of plug and play, but I often see Adobe Analytics and GA free together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting, but cool. Thank you very much, everybody, for replying to that. Let me see if I can get back to the screen share and continue on. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of background how we look at when putting these two technologies side by side. It's more than just the technologies and the tools. It's kind of the whole ecosystem. That being said, let's talk about the technologies. So Dan, I'm going to pass it over to you, but I will definitely chime in here and there. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Amin.
Yep.
Okay. So here we have the tech stack for Google. And as Amin was mentioning earlier, I think it's helpful to also look at the bigger picture of what you get when you buy into a platform. And so here we can see with Google, we've got media and tag management, visualization, and then testing, and obviously our analytics platform. So I think as we go through this, you'll see that we weighted Google's capabilities more on the marketing side because they're clearly set up for that. And a lot of organizations, speaking to why some companies might have both tools installed, you'll have a marketing team that's super interested in having GA for their campaign measurement, but also use obviously Adobe just for overall measurement on their site. Looking at Adobe's, it's pretty similar in the fact that you're also able to manage your campaigns if you buy into these products. The one differentiator here, I think, is really Adobe has Experience Manager, which if you're not familiar with it, it's sort of like a CMS and digital asset management tool, which plays very nicely with the other tool, Test and Target, where you can do your testing. And all of these obviously flow back into the cloud and allow you to share data across all the platforms. So you can really execute nicely on your analytics, your campaigns, and so on and so forth. Looking at the products side by side, this is really just from our own experience of working with our clients and obviously my client-side experience. But as we mentioned earlier, if we're looking at rating these tools on how organizations typically use them, Adobe, just for that Experience Manager tool alone, you can imagine that folks use it more for the site analytics, and it also obviously plays nicely into their marketing stack. But on the flip side, we've got Google, and more on the marketing side, because it plays so nicely with a lot of the tools that probably most of your marketing team is using already.
And just to build on this, I think you'll see some of the items in here say high, low, and then they're like different right after. One thing that we've seen is that because Adobe Analytics is so highly customizable, at the get-go and throughout, having that knowledge of how it's set up and maintained or sustainable is kind of critical. Where with Google Analytics, because it's Google Analytics 360 is based on the Google Analytics free version, a lot of out-of-the-box reporting, a lot more structured. So the community and sustainability within an organization, because of that, is actually high. With Google Analytics, again, it's the most popular web analytics platform, the free version. So 360 is just built on top of that. It's not totally different from the free version. So the resources online, the partner system, and even education within it, there's a lot more of it because it's more accessible and less customizable for the business. At the same time, that could potentially be challenging for some organizations because they see Google Analytics, they have the reports, and they have to kind of morph what they're doing into that standardized approach, which I think you probably have in a later slide as well. The other thing that I wanted to maybe build on this, if that's all right.
Sure.
Those tools have integrations with their own tech stack, and obviously it's very seamless within their own tech stack, as Dan mentioned before. One thing that we see with at least Google Analytics 360 is, from our experience, it's a lot more prevalent in other systems, other technologies for that kind of auto integration. Lots of other tools have a checkbox to send data to GA, or for marketing campaigns to auto tag, auto track. Adobe Analytics has some of that, but also needs to be configured. So there's some advantages there, potentially disadvantages, again, depending on your organization and how everything is set up. The last point I guess I want to touch on, and Dan, let me know if I'm stealing your thunder from anything that's coming up, but on the attribution side. I think you'll see a couple slides where we're comparing channel reports between the two, but I think, again, because Google Analytics is more designed for marketing, there's been, from my opinion, a lot more investment in the attribution space. There's data-driven attribution modeling just for GA360 built into the tool. Google was going to launch a new attribution product completely. Now they're kind of morphing it with GA in the future. Adobe has attribution capabilities, but it's not been as much of the core focus of the actual platform. So I think that is one other thing to kind of keep in mind. Again, what type of business are you? Focusing on marketing or analytics or both? There's advantages and strengths with either tool.
Yep. And we did have a question online about seeing Google better for marketing, if Adobe integrates with marketing tools as well. And just to be more clear on that, so obviously it really depends on your tech stack and what you're using for your campaign management. Because so many organizations are already built in or already are executing their campaigns against Google platforms, it tends to just play more nicely from an integration standpoint. But it totally depends on how you execute your campaigns and the integrations that you have set up amongst your tools.
Yeah, and we'll talk about a couple of those here in a couple slides.
Yeah.
Cool. Shall we continue? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
So speaking to you a little bit about what our clients love about Adobe Analytics. So as we've been saying, Adobe is very customized to a user's needs. So you can build whatever you want, basically, and you have a lot of flexibility in what you're building. So that lends itself well to a couple different things, but path reporting is a huge one that I see customers taking advantage of. You have a little example of that on the right-hand side in the screenshot, but just understanding where customers are going on your site and how they're navigating it, that is basically out of the box with Adobe based on your Pages report. Now, the fun thing that you can do with that report is you can also expand it. So this is based off of your props that you're collecting within Adobe Analytics, but let's say you wanted to understand the flow of how customers navigate products on your site. All you'd have to do is drop the product interactions into a prop, turn on your pathing, and see how customers navigate products across your site. You can use that really for just about anything on your site that you want to. So another good use case for that is on-site search. So how are customers refining their search? And you can see nice, easy path reports to get at that. The other thing that I think that Adobe does nicely is their flexibility with custom variables, or EVARs. So you have the flexibility to capture that data at any point in the customer's journey. So it could be their first interaction, it could be their last interaction. It could be captured for the duration of a visit or longer for the customer's journey on your site. You also have the ability to expire it on different events on your site. So for instance, on-site search is a classic one. If you're trying to associate keywords back with, say, products, you want to understand which keywords are leading to the purchase of certain products. You have a lot of flexibility in how you set that up specifically to your own business's needs. And then also another big one for a lot of enterprise customers is importing and exporting data. Frankly, we see a lot of folks spending less and less time in the reporting interface. They actually downstream and consuming those reports in, say, a dashboard. And then also getting data into Adobe Analytics is fairly easy, obviously with the right support from IT. But importing it and even down to the use of saint classification, where you can reclassify data that you've already collected, that's a huge feature for a lot of folks. And then lastly, I'll close with Workspace. It is a little bit more technical. But for folks that are familiar with it and know their implementation well, they can set up their own reports and do a lot of intense analysis or advanced analysis, I'd say, directly within the platform. And then on the flip side, let's say that you're not an analyst and you want to share your reports. It makes a really great platform for putting together dashboards and sharing them with your report stakeholders, where folks can just log in and see the reports that they need.
Cool. So we had a number of questions come in. I'm actually going to go through the next slide just to kind of give the same comparison for what our team and clients love about GA. And then we'll come back to a couple of the questions. May save some for the end just to make sure we get through all the content as well. But to also show you some of the items that our team and clients love about GA, it's not exhaustive. Same with the list that Dan showed. There's a lot more things that our clients and teams love. The things we hear the most about Google Analytics is the auto integrations, auto tracking, and plugins with other tools. So the screenshot we're showing on the right is actually one example of the ecosystem. Kind of builds on the Google Marketing Platform slide that Dan described earlier, but shows a little bit more of the data flow between them. What I think has been really valuable, and I touched on a little earlier with Google Analytics, is that there's also a lot of auto integrations with other tools outside of the Google ecosystem. That's a little bit more plug and play. So very similar to the point of getting data in and out of Google Analytics, of Adobe Analytics, it's also possible with GA, and there's some pre-built integrations, including Salesforce, SessionCam, Bazaarvoid. These are all tools that we've used among many others to get data in and out of Analytics itself, as well as the measurement protocol. And there is a question about getting data into GA and the latency. I'll talk on that soon because it's relevant to the measurement protocol point. Another thing that I think is really powerful, and we actually have some examples, is the advanced segmentation capabilities, particularly because they can be built into audiences and passed to at least the Google advertising tools like Google AdWords, Google Ads, or DV360, Display and Video 360, quickly, easily, seamlessly. Also, with Google's relatively recent partnership with Salesforce, now if any organization is using Salesforce Marketing Cloud, you can use those same audiences to power retargeting email campaigns or any kind of touch points within the Salesforce Marketing Cloud platform as well. One note about all these integrations using Google Ads, DV360, even Salesforce or Google Optimize to get those audiences, that's all free, included with the GA360 license on the Google side. The Salesforce integration is interesting because with Salesforce Marketing Cloud, from our experience, there is an added cost on the Salesforce side to enable the integration. At least that's what we've been hearing from our clients and their partners at Salesforce. But on the Google side, when you get Google Analytics 360, all these integrations come with it, assuming you have these other tools in your ecosystem. Lastly, I think one of the powerful and unique capabilities with Google, being Google, having so many platforms with logged-in users such as YouTube, Chrome, Gmail, etc. I think they have over 7 products with 1 billion users each logged in, authenticated. They have a really robust Google Graph. understanding of users, their cross-device interactions, and they provide that to you within Google Analytics via the Google Signals reporting. And with that, not only comes cross-device reports and ability to use that in audience retargeting automatically, it also gives you in-store visit reporting if you have that configured with some prerequisites with Google Ads as well. But again, the Google Ads reporting on in-store visits, if you're e-commerce or retailer with brick and mortar stores, you can get that into GA and do some even more robust reporting included in there based on the Google Graph and Google Signals. So I think it's really interesting and powerful capabilities there. All right, maybe let's take a break for some questions, perhaps.
Sure.
Let me pop that out. Let's see, why don't we start with the point that I mentioned about data in, data out, and the tech latency. So the question reads, which platform enables low latency data processing into the marketing tech stack, not limiting to pixels, but offline data integrations too? I'll start, and you can chime in. So it's an interesting question because the size of the request or the latency, the data processing load, it depends on how much data you're actually sending into either. We haven't seen either be more powerful or more capable of handling data requests, especially off the browser or through the pixels. It's just a matter of what you're trying to include in each system. Both have processing capabilities offline as well. With Google Analytics, it's a measurement protocol where any internet-connected device can send data in, stitch it to your online data, especially if you have the client ID in both systems. And there's a lot of things that you can do with bringing in that offline data, either through measurement protocol or data import, specifically for Google Analytics 360. I will say there's enhanced SLAs for processing with GA360, and I think there's SLAs with Adobe Analytics as well, but the capabilities are relatively the same. I can't say we've done an exercise to actually compare the two at that level to really see which one's more, I don't know, faster or easier to process, because both should be relatively light and shouldn't impact your performance or anything like that. So we'd recommend kind of reviewing individual tags, not trying to compare them. Dan, I don't know if you have any other color to add to that one.
Yeah, I mean, with Adobe, I've worked with a number of companies to import offline data or back-end sales data. And I mean, it's fairly straightforward once you get it set up. And so it's just, about working with IT and getting those data exports ready and queued up, say in the morning, and then getting that data just fed into Adobe. And overall, it's fairly fast at letting you have access to that reporting once it's been loaded into the tool itself. So.
Yeah. Lots of questions coming in. Very, very quick one. Recording will be sent. Yes, we can knock that one out. A couple of these questions actually might come up in the next upcoming slides, such as e-commerce funnels, behavioral funnels. I guess one question that came up that I think is relevant to a couple slides back, which platform is best for doing analysis, quick and easiest for data exploration? It's an interesting question because either can be good for analysis. It depends on your people, platform, processes. We may have some opinions.
Yeah, we've had opinions.
One opinion I will share, and Dan, you can share if you agree or disagree.
Sure.
That's kind of the point. I think when it comes to quickest and easiest for data exploration, assuming your implementation is the same, let's just say hypothetically, same implementation, what we've seen is the access to the data analysis insights is faster with Google Analytics because of the structured nature of it and the out-of-the-box reporting. Assuming you have a good implementation there. Dan, do you...
Honestly, I mean, I'll go back to my workspace point. I think that Adobe's ability to segment and slice and dice data on the fly in workspace is kind of unparalleled to GA, and I mean that comes with its own pros and cons. So in Adobe, you have the ability to really break anything down by anything that you want to, and include metrics that you want to that may or may not be relevant for whatever you're reporting on. So you really have to understand your implementation and how it's set up. But Adobe will let you just slice and dice and stack dimensions and metrics to do your analysis on the fly. I mean, that said, to contrast with GA, it's nice from the fact that there's some guardrails and that you can only put in the dimensions and metrics that really fit together based on your implementation. So, and outside of that, I mean, I think it kind of comes down to where you've got your experience in. If you're more familiar with GA, at the end of the day, you're probably going to be much better at doing analysis in it, or more efficient than you are in Adobe until you get the hang of things, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing I will say that when looking at Google Analytics to Adobe Analytics, just those side by side, all of this holds true. There's reasons why Google is also heavily investing in BigQuery and their cloud platforms, as well as other tools like Data Studio for visualization, to kind of provide those added customizations or slice and dice capabilities, if you will. But from a product-to-product perspective alone, yes, we've seen Workspace be a little bit more customizable, able to get you different visuals potentially quicker if you know what you're looking for. Again, depends if you're looking for full customization and you know what you're doing, or something that's simple if you're not, an analyst in the trenches of the data. So, a lot more questions.
Should we just maybe move on?
I think, yes. I'm just seeing if there's anything that's relevant specifically to what we already discussed, but I think we can try to come back and hammer on these as we go.
Okay.
So keep them coming, and we'll try to make sure we have time at the end. So.
Awesome. So we thought it'd be helpful for folks that maybe want a taste of the other side, that haven't seen, say, Google Analytics reports or Adobe Analytics reports, to see just kind of what they look like. And so that's going to be our next section here. So this is a e-commerce funnel that I put together. Super simple. You just drop and drag the steps that you want to include in your funnel. The fun thing about their funnel reporting is that it can really be anything that you want. So if you want to understand how many customers went to a specific page and then maybe added to cart, or had checked maybe a product detail page, you can be really specific about what you drop and drag into the interface itself. So it doesn't just have to be a page. It doesn't have to be a step in the typical way that you think about things with Google Analytics. And then on the flip side, looking at Google Analytics, this is your standard checkout funnel. And we'll touch on this a little bit later, but this really isn't changeable in the way that Adobe is like really flexible and that you can drop and drag whatever you want. These are predefined reports that you're going to want to fashion your site around when you do your data collection. But very similar reporting between the two. If we look at the channel side by side, so this is a view that I actually honestly do not use. This is the first and the last touch channel view. The reason I don't use it very much is the first touch is literally the first interaction with a cookie from the customer perspective. So over time, that tends to lose its value and its meaning. If you're talking about somebody clicking on a paid search ad maybe 4 months ago versus them coming to your website on email in the past couple days. But it is a nice overview of the channel reporting. Our next view is kind of a more traditional view, in which we've got a table. And again, like I said earlier, you can mix and match your metrics and add in whatever you want. So you can really break down your marketing channels by all the metrics that you have available in your implementation and see what comes of it. But this is a pretty standard view, I would say, for most organizations when they're pulling their channel reporting. Looking at Google Analytics, here's our overview for the channel reporting as well. You can see it's fairly similar in the respect that we're breaking down all of our channels. We've got a flow of our users and our conversions, and we can see their engagement metrics with the site itself. So, the one feature that I was talking about earlier, the path reporting, this is an example of it, and this is within the reports interface. So if you're unfamiliar with Adobe, there's the reports interface, and then there's Workspace. Workspace is the more flexible reporting interface, and the reports interface is your more traditional, where you think about loading individual reports and then adding in your metrics on top of that. So if it looks like this report is 10 years old, it's probably because Adobe hasn't touched it and has been updating it in Workspace. But that being said, this is a nice flow for, obviously we've blocked out the actual pages and the identifying client information, but we start out with, let's say, the home page, and then the next 5 steps are the next 5 pages that they went to. And then you break that down by the next 5 pages that you go to after that. And like I said, this doesn't just have to be a pages report. This can really be measuring any kind of interaction on your customer site that you put into a prop and turn on your path reporting for.
I think I could probably take this one.
Okay.
When it comes to Google Analytics pathing reports and capabilities, this one's a little bit of an interesting conversation that I always have with clients, because usually we start with saying, okay, well, if you're trying to find a flow, custom funnels like this, which is available in GA360, might be best for you, but there are limitations. And we understand this is strictly for what you define as part of your sequence. So you could use the example like behavior flows or user flow reports. Admittedly, similar to how Dan mentioned about the channels reports, I think in Adobe, we try to avoid this report, to be very transparent, because it's highly sampled and kind of confusing to use. Still, it's a type of pathing report in Google Analytics, but between the custom funnel and this pathing report, there's definitely some work to be done here. Now, I think I saw a question, and I definitely want to be mindful that there are updates being made by Google to fix this and to provide even more capabilities. So between Firebase reports for mobile apps, app and web new properties, as well as advanced analysis reporting, there's efforts and strives to make this easier and better within Google Analytics. But today, current state, these are the kind of tools or the reports that we see available in GA with some room to go there. Of course, you can always pull that data out into BigQuery or another system and visualize it there. Of course, within Google Analytics specifically, there's more to be had, I guess, with these particular reports. However, one option that we've also encouraged our clients to consider, kind of going back to what are you trying to actually do with your analysis? If you're purely trying to visualize pathing, okay, there's some challenges there, and there's some workarounds and other ways, and Google's working on updates, and we want to be mindful of that. There's some things in beta even. However, maybe what you're looking to do is just understand a sequence of steps users are taking and learn more about these users or sessions across your reporting. And that's where sequence segments, advanced segments might actually come into play as advantageous. One of the things I personally like a lot about Google Analytics is the segmentation capabilities, not only because it helps with analysis and understanding your customers and their behaviors, but they can easily be passed to audiences and other tools like Google Ads, DV360, Optimized Salesforce, etc. That's kind of one of the cornerstones of Google Analytics, I think. So again, depending on the analysis you're trying to do, if you're trying to group users that follow a specific flow, there's other ways, other options that we highly recommend. Wanted to show an animated GIF. Love animated GIFs for those that know me, or for those that don't, now you know. Animated GIFs are awesome. But also what's awesome is the Google Analytics segmentation capabilities, like I mentioned. So lots of different options here. I'm not going to go into in depth, but when talking about capabilities within GA and GA360, I think the segmentation audience building is really superior, or very, very strong, I should say. There's a real strength there, and it's very quick to process. My personal experience with Adobe Analytics, but also other tools, is sometimes this processing takes a long time if you're really segmenting and filtering. I know Google makes a strive to get you the insights quick, so they put a lot of faster processing right in the UI for these different segments, if you will. I will say one thing before I kind of pass to Dan to talk about segmentation and Adobe Analytics, because I think a question came up around sampling, or really just the limits here with GA360, and maybe Dan, you can speak to the sampling and freshness of the data for Adobe, but it's true, with GA360 you have higher sampling limits, because with the free version you have so much sessions and so many hits per month, different data will either be sampled or Google will stop collecting. If you're over, I think, 500,000 sessions is still the limit for free, your interface, your reporting might get sampled. Again, because Google is committed to fast insights, faster processing. With GA360, I think the limit now is 100 million. It kind of has been changed over the last couple of years, but up to 100 million sessions in whatever date range you're looking at, won't be sampled in the UI, and the processing speed will continue to be fast when you build a segment or add a filter. There might be some nuances there, of course. So for those analysts that are going to call me out in the questions panel for nuances or special reports that have different sampling rates, it's true. Most reports, they have that limitation. The speed to querying a report, especially when adding advanced segment, is still very, very fast to get you what you need and to move forward.
Yeah, and speaking of sampling, I'll just note that Adobe doesn't do sampling. The downside is that sometimes it can take a little bit longer for your reports to load.
Yeah.
So I would say that really the functionality with segments between Adobe and GA are pretty similar. And so here I've set up an example which is nearly identical to the sample that Amin shared earlier. But we're just breaking down customers that went to a specific page, had a cart addition, and then had an order. The nice thing with segmentation in Adobe is that, again, you can use anything that you want to create a segment. So it's super flexible from that standpoint. I've also included something here that I really, really love about Adobe, in that there are time ranges in which you can expect that something happened. So they're really flexible, but you can see here we're starting with the customer went to the home page, had a cart addition, and then within 1 week placed an order. That's nice if you've got specific campaigns running on your site or externally in your marketing channels where you don't expect a conversion maybe immediately within a session, but want to know over time and want to be specific about what that time range is. Okay, so let's wrap up with one more poll.
Yes. So let me launch it, gotta find it, here we go.
So what are your biggest challenges with your current platform? That's what we're interested in.
I think we'll give this one maybe just 30 to 45 seconds for people to answer. And maybe we'll jump to questions because there's a lot of questions. Some of the ending slides we can
breeze
through or just save for when we have it out. All right, so we got maybe about 20 more seconds, and almost half of the people have responded, so please take a moment to answer this poll. Right now. All right, we're going to close the poll and share the results. So, biggest challenges, implementation, data collection. The core of any analysis is making sure you have your data collection right. So that's interesting, and we see that as well. Happy to help. We don't talk much about implementation key takeaways, if you will, on this particular webinar, but we're happy to talk more through it. So appreciate you guys sharing that with us as well. So Dan and I were just talking. I think we're going to take a moment to answer some of the questions. I know we have maybe about 10 minutes left and want to get to the questions. If we don't get to the rest of the slides, I think it's fine. We'll hang out, I think, a little bit over the time, and we'll obviously send the presentation. But let's actually jump to the questions and see if we can go through a few of them since a lot have come in. Okay, so let's start with this one. A quick one. Does Adobe have a payload limit like Google with 8,192 bytes as far as on-site tracking with it? So I could probably answer that first or give my flavor there. Technically, that's a browser thing. It's not really a Google Analytics limitation exactly. It's the browser size for any hit request sent. Engineers keep me honest and happy to check with our engineering team in case that is different for Adobe, but to my knowledge, it's more of a browser limitation, just with the size of a request that can be sent on the internet, on a browser, if you will. So I don't think Google or Adobe differentiate in that one, but...
Good question. I mean, that's the first time I've been asked that question, so thank you, Adam.
Yeah. Good question, Adam. Thank you. We can always check with our engineers to be sure, of course, but that's, to my knowledge, it's more of a browser thing. Okay, so let's see here. One question we have, kind of going a little bit back, and this might be technical. In order to track user behavior with stateless events and not limiting to stateful events, which platform is better? Dan, how would you, I guess, tackle that question? From stateless events to stateful events? I think we might need more information of what is meant by that question.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't quite understand the question.
Yeah. So happy to try and tackle that question if it can be reworded, I suppose, between stateless events and stateful events. I will say I think both platforms, events are hit-based, so they're at the time something happens, an event's tracked. Along with that, you can have dimensions or evars and props with Adobe Analytics that have different scopes or different lifespans. So some can be session level, user level, or some just at that point that they're collected. To Dan's point, with Adobe, there's more customization you can do around how long something lives and when it can be eliminated or overwritten. With GA, once it's kind of set, depending on the scope, it will persist for whatever that scope is. So session level will persist for the rest of that session or web visit. If it's user level, from the points collected moving forward, it will continue until it's overwritten, if you will, collecting, or cookies are deleted and the user uses a different browser.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers that one.
So here's, I think, another good question, going back to e-commerce features and behavioral funnels, and understanding, I think, the differences between the two with Adobe and GA. So again, if you think about Google Analytics, a lot of it is predefined. Things like your product impressions, your product clicks, your add to carts, your remove from carts, those are things that are just naturally within the tool that you need to apply to your site. The difference is that with Adobe, while some of those things are out of the box, not a lot of those things are out of the box, which isn't necessarily a detractor. It just means that you need to have a good implementation partner that has a vision of what are the things that you need for your e-commerce reporting that you're going to need to build. So, and I mean, that goes all the way down to the behavioral funnels, where you saw, like, you can add and make a funnel out of anything, and whereas GA is a little bit more specific in wanting to track a funnel in a very specific way and creating steps. So I would say that's probably one of the key differences there.
Yeah, the standard funnel reports in GA require specific attributes. Custom funnels give you more flexibility for any dimension or metric, but there's also limits to how many steps there are in the funnels themselves with the custom funnel capability with GA 360. Okay, let's take another quick question. It's a little bit more broad, but which tool is better for attribution? I can start with just saying they're a little different.
And it depends on what you buy on the Adobe side.
True. So to elaborate on that, but correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, the attribution capabilities within Adobe, there's some built in with the base package or additional ones you have to pay extra to enable.
Yeah, and then if you think more broadly, I mean, I think this is a quirk of all attribution analysis, but having all of your marketing campaigns and touch points within a single platform is difficult for a lot of companies. And so I think where Google Analytics shines is the fact that the platforms that a lot of companies execute their media on are already auto-integrating and bringing their data into your Google Analytics platform. The downside is that if you don't have a complete mix there, if you're not fully bought into the GA campaign stack, then you're going to be missing some touch points with your customers. And similar for Adobe. If you execute all of your campaigns through the Adobe tech stack, you're going to have a lot more visibility into attribution analysis. Now, that being said, you can also import data into both, I believe, and correct for that. But yeah.
I will say it comes back down to implementation. Either way, or implementation configuration, either way, you need your campaigns captured in some way in the enterprise tools. If you don't have, for GA, UTM parameters, or for Adobe, any kind of mapping for your channels, whatever, you're not going to be able to do attribution regardless. The other, I guess, one other advantage, but because I think we were having a conversation earlier this morning, Google does provide that data-driven attribution modeling in GA 360. It's essentially an algorithm-based model that Google provides for you based on some of the data or all of the data that you have in Google Analytics leading up to a conversion. So instead of relying on the models that are pre-built or building a custom model, which you can still do, you can look against a data-driven attribution model that's pre-built by Google. They provide you some of the percentages and the logic that goes into it, so you can compare against your other models. You don't have to use it only if you're nervous that Google's going to only weight Google advertising, of course. But I think that's been really, really useful to compare against whatever model you're currently using. Let's take one more general question. I'm going to try to hit a couple with this one general topic, which is around the changing landscape within the internet, I guess, with both regulations as well as browser changes with ITP, ETP, just cookies in general, like how those are being much harder to rely on. So I can start with just one perspective when thinking, okay, can Google or Adobe handle the changing landscape better? I'll have a personal opinion versus a general comment. The general comment is analysis is going to change. Internet is changing. We need to consider other ways to analyze versus always relying on cookie-based methodologies. That being said, one thing that we've seen has been advantageous is when you're using a specific ecosystem, if the cookie that is required for tracking is shared across the platform, that is more advantageous. For example, if you're using Google Ads, Campaign Manager, DV360, and Google Analytics, that's a shared cookie space. That data, there's less likelihood of any kind of data loss when sharing data between these different platforms. So that could be advantageous, especially if you're invested in that ecosystem. On the Adobe side, I'm actually not positive if it's the same cookie used for like Adobe Audience Manager versus Analytics versus Target. If it is, and you're invested in those tools, again, the data share can work between them. It really depends on the ecosystem that you're using and the data sharing between them. So I hope that kind of answers a couple of different questions. We can't say one is better or not than the other or more equipped for the future. All of measurement's going to change as we enter the future.
Yeah.
All right, so we only have we have 1 minute left. I'm actually going to exit out of the full screen and maybe just jump to kind of the closing slide. We'll stick around for a couple extra minutes for more questions. Sorry we didn't get through the rest of the differences, but we've kind of talked on them, and we can share the slides afterwards. So Dan, do you want to take us through this slide?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're thinking about switching platforms, we were talking earlier about the people and process behind it, but a couple of things that you'll want to maybe assess yourself on as you...
Sorry, I think I need to reshare my screen.
Oops. There we go.
Try now? Go ahead.
Okay. So if you're thinking about it, consider ranking yourself on a couple of these different questions. So assessing your current and future tech stack, and listing which products that you have and platforms that you have that will maybe require extra work, whether you go from Adobe to GA or vice versa. Another is thinking about if you're taking data and pushing it somewhere, or if you're importing data into your tool already. That's certainly a big consideration, and we'll need help from IT typically. So you'll obviously have to recreate that if that's something that you're doing, and it'll be part of your ranking there. Assess your data layer and tag management needs. If you're already bought into GA and you're using their tag management and data layer, you may have to move away from that for Adobe depending on how far you want to move. A lot of clients that I've seen with a data layer question for Adobe have a very broad, general, in-house created data layer that moves to different platforms, so it's not really tied to one, but it's certainly something to think about. And then think about the pain points that you have and whether a new platform will really address them. Is it implementation work that needs to be done that hasn't been completed? Is it education that should be done that maybe hasn't? And working with your stakeholders to make sure that your implementation is in tip-top shape. Oftentimes it's easier to fix what you have than it is to remove everything and start with a new platform. Tend to find that clients, a year later will go through the implementation process and maybe have the same underlying issues with not having process and education put in place for their stakeholders. And then lastly, the most important piece for the success of any tool really is the education and getting the reports in the hands of your stakeholders. So just ensuring that everybody knows how to use the tool, what's available to them, and how to go about that. So
I would argue the most important thing is hiring a partner like InfoTrust. I'm just kidding. Hopefully this was helpful. I know we're over time, so if anyone needs to drop off, the slides recording will be shared. We'll hang around, I think, a couple extra minutes and try to go through some questions for anyone that can stay longer. And again, apologies we didn't get through all the slides, but it was terrific questions, terrific engagement. So for any of those that are dropping off, thank you. We'll be in touch. Our email will also be included in the slides if you have direct questions to us, but check out our website otherwise.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go. For those that are sticking around, we'll answer the questions so they're at least included in the recording as well. For some of these, I think we'll have to go through quickly because there's quite a few, but let's see. Okay, so I think the question around ITP, which platform can address it better, we kind of touched on that a little bit. Both are equally affected by changes to the landscape and to the internet and privacy regulations and browsers, eliminating cookies and such. So there's workarounds or solutions to both. We can talk more about it, I think, offline on that one. Question from Adam. There's been a few from Adam, so thank you very much for that. I think this is a good one we should talk about. Can you integrate any Google advertising tools with Adobe, and what is the effort?
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So my experience is that you can. So the most important thing is that you have a connection between the customer viewing the ad and then the data that you're collecting. So oftentimes you'll have a unique identifier like the click ID?
Client ID?
Client ID.
Or from
click ID.
From AdWords?
Yeah.
Ads?
Yeah. So like maybe exposing that to the tool in some fashion, and that will be your connection between, say, AdWords and getting your data paired up when you match it and import it into Adobe. So really, I mean, what it comes down to is having a unique identifier that you're going to be connecting your reports on and then importing that data into GA. It is quite cumbersome and isn't foolproof. So, I mean, that's a huge advantage if your company is like already bought into the Google tech stack of using just Google Analytics because it already auto-integrates. But yes, it's certainly possible. It's just a little bit more challenging. Well, it's actually certainly more challenging than using Google.
Right. Basically, you have to recreate what Google automatically built from an integration perspective, because Google Analytics uses the same process where it's gclid, the click ID, if you will, merged and mapped to the client ID, which is the cookie for Google Analytics, and then the data flow between the two happens with impressions and clicks and costs. Google does it all for you when you integrate them in the UI. Same with Campaign Manager, DV360, SA360. You know, it maps it all automatically, auto tagging and all of that. It's not, what Google is doing is not like necessarily only something Google can do. They just do it for you. So again, more work can be done, but a little bit more involved. One thing that I will say that I believe, unless something's changed recently, Adobe does not have is Search Console. I think Search Console data, which is Google Search Console, previously known as Webmaster Tools. There's data flow from Search Console into GA360 and some custom reports, or not, sorry, standard reports included there. That's one of the unique, I guess, integration points for a tool that might not be really mentioned very much, but very, very powerful indeed. Another question on the same kind of audience route. What audience capabilities are only available within GA360 but not available in Adobe? Is it more around the ease of integration and audience activation, or is there any added value to audience management in GA360 if you already use Adobe Audiences? So I think it's kind of similar to our previous answer, and I can start. Definitely the ease of integration, the data flow between the two, the maintainability, and then the speed to take a segment and pass it to an audience. That's advantages we've seen, at least with using the Google process. It's more cumbersome, and also potentially requiring more like pixels and tracking on your site to do it properly with Adobe. We've seen some organizations set up where they have Adobe Audience Manager identify certain types of audiences or users that visit the site, and once they do, they fire Google Ads Pixel, and that's how audiences are built in Google Ads. It's not a true integration, it's more of a trigger, because Adobe Audience Manager found this, fire the pixel for Google Ads, and there's your audience. There's no data flow between the two, or stitching where from GA you have just GA tracking. You don't even need Google Ads Pixels necessarily for retargeting audiences. You use the GA tracking and pass that audience onward. So definitely ease of integration and speed, and potentially slight performance increase, but really it's just about maintainability, so you don't need all the AdWords pixels necessarily every time. But I don't know if you have any other flavor to add to that that question, Dan.
No, good job.
Yeah, okay. That is also a reason why we see Adobe Analytics and GA360 together on a site. Kind of going way back in the beginning, marketing focus, marketing ease, marketing speed, audiences, using GA where Adobe might be fully deployed. Do you want to check that next question?
Yeah, so one really fun one is how hard is it to migrate the historical data from, say, Adobe to GA? And what I find a lot of clients doing, ideally you have been exporting your data out of either platform and probably consuming it someplace else, say like a Data Studio, a Tableau, or at the very least a data warehouse. So you've got that data captured somewhere for yourself. At the very least, what some folks will do is just some data exports as you're wrapping up the implementation and switching to the new tool. So you have that data to reference. But the thing to know is that sometimes Adobe and GA reporting is very different. And it can be for obvious reasons like something wasn't deployed correctly in the previous TMS, and so therefore the tool didn't capture it. And now that we're re-implementing a whole new tool, GA is capturing it, and we're seeing more data on a specific data point. Or it can just be about some fundamental differences about GA and Adobe, like how sessions are captured and expired. But the long and the short of it is that oftentimes you'll just get conflicting stories when you try to compare the two. So I don't recommend that. You have your data historically in the previous platform to reference, ideally, moving forward. And then another nice thing is that oftentimes we'll see clients have overlap in the two tools. So we do an implementation, we wait for a year, and we have both of the products on, so you can have a full year's worth of data in either platform to do year-over-year comparisons once you finally cut over to the new platform. So.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see. I think we can take maybe 2 more questions. I know there's a lot. We might not get to them all. I apologize, but feel free to email us or we can follow up. But let's check this one. So this was a follow-up to the stateful, stateless one, stateless question, if you will. There's it's more of a scenario. So if a user took an action to add a product to the cart, it is stateful. Both platforms are capable of recording this, but if a user hovered over a product, toggled between add, removes, and other interactions, they showed interest in the product but didn't take that action within that session. I'd like to know the interest to take appropriate action. Which platform is best suited for this kind of tracking without increasing server costs or server calls and associated costs?
Yeah. So one thing I can speak to, at least from the Adobe side, is that there's built-in heat mapping. It may not be the best heat mapping available, but it does exist. So I think that would probably meet that requirement on the Adobe side.
What I would say from a Google side, it's a really interesting question because there's a couple different angles you could take where maybe you track an action or an attribute as user level, so it goes beyond that first session. So instead of tracking each and every action, at least the first time they do an action as a user level action, like they did this once, so they're interested even in the future if you don't continuously track. But to Dan's point, I think other capabilities and other tools might be more advantageous. In this case, I know personally, because we're certified partners, SessionCam might be an interesting tool to explore here because it shows you and captures all these interactions without, I believe, any added server costs. There's session recording and heat mapping tool. Of course, I'm going to say, because we mentioned earlier, there is an auto integration with GA to take users that do particular actions and capture data in SessionCam, pass it into GA, which then you can pass on to audience activation elsewhere. But because there's heat mapping in Adobe directly, and I think there's other tools that might closely integrate with Adobe that are session recording, like IBM TLeaf, I think has a close integration. There's options there. Kind of depends on your toolkit for that particular scenario. That's a good question, a little bit more advanced side. So, all right, let's take one more question. Why don't we talk about this one? For GA, there is BigQuery for raw data analysis. Is there any option for Adobe?
Yeah. So I believe they launched a new data environment in which if you pay for the service, that you can work with the data within the platform. the challenge is that a lot of companies that I think that have this need have probably already started doing data exports out of GA and into their own data warehouse. So for a lot of enterprise customers, I would say that have already addressed this issue, they've probably already building it internally. But I do believe there's an option. I have not used it, obviously, and we haven't had clients that are using it currently to actually pull it into Adobe's own data environment, similar to GA.
Cool. So we are well over time, and our marketing team has put up our Contact Us poll to, I think, tell us that we need to wrap up. So again, thank you everybody for joining, and sorry we ran out of time. The slides will be shared. Sign up on our site for more events, and if we want to have a follow-up to this, I think we'd be happy to do so. There seemed to be a lot of engagement. But of course, we're here to help. So if you guys want to have more conversations, any other discussions, we're happy to have those. Just feel free to contact us, or we'll contact you if you fill out this poll. Otherwise, thanks so much for your time, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.